Welcome, welcome, welcome in everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Carepatrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We're so glad to have you here today. We have a guest speaker who we've had before, who was very well received, and we look forward to learning today what she has to share. If you're new to Carepatrol, you may not be aware of really who we are or why we do what we do. We educate our clients about what is ahead in their road of aging care and support. We provide guidance, advocacy. We tour people in communities if community placement is appropriate, and all of that is done at no charge to our clients, just as this CEU is at no charge to you. And if our clients move into a community or use a service provider that we recommend, we are commissioned. So we remain free to our clients, which I hope will encourage you to share their names with us when folks need help that you know that we can help. We're going to be free and we're going to be helpful, and we're going to educate them like we hope to do. Well, I know we will today. We're accredited by the Alabama Board of Nursing and also the Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners. And this is 1.0 contact hour for you today. If you're a nurse and you complete the evaluation, we will be posting your hours within the week, usually on Mondays. And if you're a social worker and a nurse and you do the certificate, not if you're and both, but either or, you know what I'm saying. You get a certificate and that should come out within 24 hours. And if Ms. Friedman is so willing, we can share her presentation with you as well. Jessica Friedman is our guest today, and I invited her back after she did such a slam dunk job last time. And today's topic, which is her suggestion and one that I really love, is concerns when working with veterans. And she knows these concerns, Ms. Friedman does, because of her work with veterans disability. She also works in Social Security disability and railroad disability, and her firm has done that since the 70s. Her father started it. She is now running it. And doing a terrific job for attorneys and a number of people in her office, and can answer a whole host of questions that you might have. So I'm very pleased to introduce to some of you and reintroduce to others Ms. Friedman. She is both a tax lawyer, so can consult on small business work as well as the aforementioned areas. Our evaluation link is in the chat room, and I'm posting it again. We use an online evaluation tool called SurveyMonkey, and we use a password protection on this evaluation so that we know that you presumably sit through the entire class, and that is the way that we show to the Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners that for those of you who are social workers, this is a live or face-to-face CEU, and I know it's important to you to have a number of those. I'll read the link out for those of you who may have joined by phone or may be working in the background as you listen to us today. Our evaluation link, which again is online at SurveyMonkey. The link itself, I'll read it now, is https:// www.surveymonkey.com/r/ all uppercase letters Q R R 5 Q 3 X. And we will give out the password at the end today. If you aren't viewing the chat room, if you're new to Zoom, move your cursor to the top of your screen or the bottom. A black band will pop up, and on that will be the word chat. Click there, and please add your opinions to ours and to others. I feel, and Ms. Friedman strongly feels as well, that we're all enriched and enhanced by your voice, by your opinion, by your experience. We learn more when we learn from many than we learn from a single person. Groupthink is always always, in my mind, preferable to a standalone person on an island with a bunch of ideas. So we want you to ask questions and participate, add opinions or experiences. And Ms. Wesson, I'm going to type in the link again for you. It is in the chat room. If you can see it, it will be there. And Ms. Patton, thank you for answering her. And so now I'm going to let a few more people in and then introduce Jessica Friedman. And I'm so delighted that she's agreed to speak with us again today. Y'all are in for a treat. Jessica?
Thanks so much, Sean. I'm excited to be here to talk to you guys about veterans and some of the things that my law firm has picked up from our veteran clients. So as Sean said, we do veterans disability. We also do Social Security disability and corporate work, as well as some other areas. But it's our clients in those three areas, VA, Social Security, also Railroad, and our corporate work, where we have noticed certain characteristics and certain things that we like to work, we like to look out for, excuse me, when we're working with that clientele. So this presentation is really only going to work if you join in, because I'm going to play two videos from two of our veteran clients, and they're going to be talking about their time during service and their return back to society after service. And I want you guys to think about the interactions that you've had with veterans, whether it's yourself, your friends, your family, your clients, and tell me what you pick up from your interactions that you've had, your experience. Also, tell me what you see in this video. The first one is going to be of our client, who we're going to call Pete. And when we finish, I'm going to ask you what you see and what you hear. What do you pick up about him? Things that you may want to keep in mind if you were talking with a veteran client. If this were your client, what are some things that you learn about him through this conversation with him? Let me play.
Is he frozen?
No. I don't know why it's not playing.
Is it on the other screen? Maybe you need to do it because you're on two screens, right?
Yeah. Oh,
there he is. I'm not hearing the sound. I'm not.
You're not hearing the sound?
No. I don't know if others are. Ms. Dean says she doesn't have audio. No one has sound either.
Okay, let's try this again then. I'll try to play it a different way.
Okay.
Primarily I was stationed.
There we go.
Radio telephone operator, formerly referred to as RTO. I have seen dead people. I've seen Vietnamese dead, American dead. I have shrapnel in my right arm, in the upper part of my arm. It was pretty easy to come back. In this town, this area, you were not criticized or demonized like you might have been in other parts of the country. But I recall coming through the airport in California, and I don't recall what they said, but I was aware that they were not enthralled with the things that I'd been doing or everybody else that came through there.
Can you turn it up?
For some period of time, months, occasionally I would kind of be disoriented about where I was or what was going on. I probably overreacted in some ways on occasions. And I remember coming home and using the F-U-C-K word in front of my mother. And I was taken aback that, wow, I didn't mean to say that. My Vietnam experience and my Army experience, I think, created a leadership instinct within me. But I was short-tempered, had very little tolerance, felt like I needed to be in command of the situation. I guess once you've been shot at, over that. And as a young person, and with no guidance and no help, it took a long time to get over it. Looking back, and only in hindsight, I was in the initial stages of what I would characterize now as post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't even recall it having a name. You were just a crazy Vietnam vet. And it's a never-ending source of problem. I wonder how many Vietnamese civilians and soldiers have post-traumatic stress disorder. You never hear that addressed. We killed millions of those guys. And there's got to be tons of them that are that way. The Vietnam veterans or whatever, again, you see them walking around trying to relive the past. If I could just share with the world, no amount of therapy, in my humble opinion, will change someone who hasn't yet recognized they need to change. Lots of those people I see at the VA, I think their only life is having been in the Army. Till you recognize you have to change or you want to change, you never do. You just continue to live with it.
Okay, so I'm hoping you guys could hear that okay.
Yeah, you turned it up in the middle. I heard at least the last half, and I heard it all actually. But I mean, I thought midway PTSD when he described his anger. But what did other people feel about the gentleman? Ms. Patton heard most of it. So did y'all have if he were in your clinic? Ms. Dean says, I commend him for seeking help and embracing this need to speak. I do too.
Yeah, both of these veterans, they have since passed. You'll see the second one in a minute. But they did this. They came into our office and did an interview with us because they thought that it was so important to share their stories and show how people can change and what it's like, what that transition is like back to civilian life. So they did this purely for educational purposes.
And so what was this gentleman's story? So he had made some change, and then how did that come about? Do you know, I mean, what became of him or how that changed his life?
Well, he was a lovely man. But when he first, I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. But when we first, a lot of our conversations starting out on the phone, you don't see the person immediately. And so, the first question is, does he look like what you expect of a veteran? In my mind, veterans tend to be clean shaven, very well dressed. But the thing about him, he has this long beard and it's well maintained, but he looks like he's kind of a backwoods guy. But he actually lived down the street from me in Birmingham. And he was a Vietnam vet. And those are the people that we tend to see who are kind of disaffected. They feel like they haven't been seen. Often our Vietnam veterans are in motorcycle gangs. But so when we first saw him and we saw that he didn't look the way that some of our other veterans did, we knew that there might be a little bit more going on with him. And so I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to ask again, what did you see and hear that was interesting to you, that you think you might want to keep in mind if someone were to come in and talk to you?
Mrs. Dean continued that she has a curiosity if there may have been some alcohol or drug use or abuse in the man's past. And Ms. Duhan says it's interesting that he was able to express empathy for those they were fighting against, PTSD.
The empathy always gets me when he says that, because I think that that's something that came along later after he started getting therapy and thinking back about what had happened.
Right.
He said that his reception back into Alabama was fine. He didn't have as many problems versus when he came back through California. Different parts of the country are going to have different feelings about people who served sometimes, particularly when it comes to Vietnam. But he said that when he came back that he was disoriented. He didn't really know how to deal with things at first. He mentioned overreacting to things. I think that feeds into the PTSD part of it.
Right.
But he turned out to be a leader. he said he wanted, guidance and wanted to be in control. And those are things that we see show up a lot.
Miss
Do you guys
Patton,
have any other thoughts?
Miss Patton actually was letting us know that her father-in-law was in Vietnam, and he described to her his PTSD. As a night shift nurse, I have learned to always announce myself prior to touching him to wake him up to provide care. If you kind of quietly touch them to wake them up, they may choke you because they are thinking they're back in the jungles, fighting to survive and avoid sneak attacks. Wow.
That's absolutely true. We find that when we have hearings, our clients absolutely will not sit with their back toward the door. Think about how many hearing rooms usually you walk into and the door is behind you. Like, if you think about going into court, the door's never in front of you. It's always behind you. And that's the same for Social Security hearings. It's the same for veterans and railroad hearings. It's usually a small room that you walk into and there's a desk in front of you. The judge is facing you, you're facing them, and the door is behind you. But our clients will not do that. And if they do, they will move their chair all the way to the wall so that their back is against the wall and they know there's no one behind them. And they will try to turn their chair toward the door. And if you ask them why, they say, I want to be ready. Well, what do you want to be ready for? I want to be ready if someone comes in with a gun. Well, you know that we're in a federal building. There are armed guards when you walk in, and there are armed guards outside the door. But that's not enough. That's not enough reassurance for them. They want to make sure that they are ready to react in these situations. So that is something that we see very frequently.
That's fascinating. Ms. Dean continued, first, we do not judge a veteran based upon their appearance. Many young vets also have facial hair, tattoos, and an unkempt appearance. Okay.
Absolutely.
I was just sort of impressed with his story. I mean, it is powerful when you think about how many people were impacted and still that he has empathy for them. Miss Finley says, my husband is the same. How he was in Vietnam and will not sit with his back to a door, always hyper alert, and you don't wake him suddenly.
Right. Okay, so this guy, he grew up in Tuscaloosa. He was very familiar with the outdoors, which I think helped him when he went to Vietnam. He worked with animals, but he said that he always told us that a lot of the people that he served with were jittery being out in the jungle. They were not comfortable with it. But because of his upbringing, he didn't have as hard of a time being in Vietnam, and that's what he told us. So here's another one of our veterans. Okay, for you. There you
go. Delivered mail, picked it up, and distributed, just on the base in Germany. The military programs you to rules and regulations, and you don't just have that out of your head when you step out of the military like that. They didn't really understand where I was coming from, because it was just totally different for me adjusting back to civilian life after coming out of the military. I did become homeless myself, but I didn't stay out there like that. And I saw where is it that was a lot of vets that was homeless, and they never did make it back from there. It was kind of an embarrassing situation to be like that. And I know how it is when I see other people's out there on the streets like that, especially a homeless vet. We don't know what they're going through until we ask them what they are going through. And I just couldn't afford to stay out there. I knew I had a family. I had to figure some kind of way. I don't think I had any difficulties doing my work. It was basically the issue was where is it that communicating. You know, they felt like they didn't want to communicate with a vet because they felt like, and I know for a fact that they felt like vets was problems. It was hard. They didn't want to hire a veteran, period. And I experienced that. And I experienced it in a number of places. You know, they should have did everything that they possibly could within their means after serving my country. That they should have said, "Hey, this door is open for you," and guide me through the right door in order for me to accomplish and achieve the things that I needed to achieve in life. I came to grip with it where is it that I try to have to accept what is what and deal with certain things. There's things that I have to deal with and go on with on a daily basis. Where is it that there are things that I know for a fact that I have no control over, and the things that I have no control over, I try not to worry about them as much as I used to, because what can I do?
And what did you see in here? Some of the themes are the same as what you saw with the first veteran. Some of them are a little bit different.
Well,
So the first guy was in Vietnam. This guy was in Germany. He did not see any combat.
Ms. Dean says the common thread is control and the lack of, and I would agree with that. But to me, it sort of materialized in that both of them sought and did not receive guidance. So they were welcomed into the service. They did their service, but then they weren't issued any sort of way or help in transitioning.
Right. One of the things that strikes me every time I watch these videos is some of the pictures that were in each of the videos are the pictures that those veterans brought to us. They're pictures of them, and just how young they were. You know, we always people go into the service often when they're 18. But what does it mean to be 18? You know, when I was 18, I was a different person than I am now. I was leaving. You were leaving your house where you had rules and you were living under someone else's roof and had to do what they asked you to do. And then I went to college and got to do what I wanted to do. But these people, for another 4 years, were put back into a very rigid system where they were told what to do. And what do you do if you're 22 and then you're just kind of plopped back out into the world, and the only people you know are the people that were in service with you, who are now scattered all over the country, and you don't really know where to go to get a job because all you've done so far up until the first 22 years of your life is live within someone else's system. So absolutely.
Right, and those are the formative years, and I think one of the things I've read is that the thinking now is that people don't really fully mentally and emotionally mature until age 26, and so you add that aspect that these are really children, quite frankly, who are in these very traumatic experiences, and to think about that being their formative, what forms them is really shaking. There's a lot of comments here. Lack of resources, guidance for vets returning home is a common theme. Miss Patton says she never knew people would discriminate against veterans for hiring purposes. I always assumed people wanted to hire vets due to them being responsible, et cetera. And that was also new to me, Miss Patton. I had not considered that. And you think of that particular gentleman who is a Black male and veteran. I mean, that's an even bleaker road, it would seem to me. Miss Dean says it was different every time. Our country did not believe our troops belonged in the war. Clearly spoken by someone who lived there. Miss Easterling says, as a military spouse and mental health counselor, it still happens today. That's sobering. Miss Easterling says, I believe one of the points they are addressing is the barriers they have to overcome because of how society views veterans.
Right, I agree. And so when I come in contact with them, some of them have been able to have successful careers and some of them haven't. And you think, why didn't they have a successful career after the service? Is it because of something that happened in the service and they just weren't ever able to function within society, or is it because there was some other barrier, like they could have worked, but there were misconceptions about their abilities or what kind of people they were?
Right, like that one gentleman who said he had actually been homeless in his life.
And that was something that we did not know. We knew him for a long time. So the second guy was not as accomplished as the first guy. He had been homeless, and we did not know that until he came in for this interview. And we had been representing him for a while at that point. He wasn't homeless while we were representing him, but it was in his past. It was something that he was kind of ashamed of, not something that he readily shared. And he had his wife and kids were with him when he was homeless, but he found a way. He knew that he had to. And so the first guy married a woman whose father worked at Alabama Power, got him a job at Alabama Power, and he ended up overseeing, I think, hundreds of people. The second guy always had trouble working. He had trouble getting a job, and really his wife ended up being the breadwinner in that household.
It's just the effects of trauma. We've talked about trauma here with disorders and diseases and the effects that it has upon people, and most especially, again, young people. I mean, not only can it lead to disease down the road, autoimmune diseases foremost, but just the mental trauma, the potentiality for substance abuse or self-harm. You know,
go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, do you think things are or will get better in terms of the mental health support for veterans, particularly that generation, the Vietnam veterans?
Yeah, so the first guy was Vietnam vet. The second guy was not. He didn't see any combat, but he still had some of the same threads. And that's what I think is interesting about it, is that he did have some trouble during the service with people not really wanting to interact with him, but not much. Mainly his problem was when he got back, and it was the adjustment part and not being able to find a job when he got back. And that's his trauma. He did not have mental health conditions from the service. He had other problems.
Okay.
What was I think I lost my train of thought. So yeah, 1/3 of all homeless are veterans, which is something that we just have to keep in mind. We always hear that statistic. And when I look at these people, our veterans, I see some common traits. Hierarchical. Who's in charge? And when they get out, they want to know, what do I do next? Oh, you asked about transitioning back. I do think the programs have gotten better. I've been involved in a couple of the transition programs. I can't think of what they are called. Down in Montgomery, they have a fair where they try to give the returning veterans access to resources and help them find jobs and explain, how you, I guess, get a house and help them get mortgages and how to transition back in. So they do have those programs. I don't think that they're as good as they need to be, but it's definitely a start. I have heard good and bad things about the mental health at the Birmingham VA. For the most part, I find that the mental health is quite good at the Birmingham VA. The physical may not be, because there's a lot of transition there. A lot of people who come in for a few years just to do a residency or whatever, and then they leave. They don't stay. But the veterans do end up cycling through all these doctors. Whoever happens to be on that service is the one that they see. So they'll see them for a couple of years and then they're gone. So there's not any continuity as far as what has been done, what hasn't been done. They have great medical record capabilities there. They've been on electronic records for a long time. So they can see what has, the new provider can see what has been done. But that relationship and the rapport that you try to build, if you've been through a traumatic event, it probably takes these veterans, a year before they start really trusting the provider, and the provider's gone a year later. So it's like every other year they're getting good treatment when they, because they have the rapport with their provider, and then every year in between they're not.
Right. We
We
had
find
another.
that the veteran. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, we had another comment.
Yes, it's my late uncle was in the Army serving in the Vietnam War. He stated that he was unable to trust anyone after the war due to the occurrences, in parentheses, Vietnamese children throwing grenades at his squad, women firing arms at them, in parentheses. He was self-destructive for many years after returning to the States, and Miss Patton said this was the situation my father-in-law described to me. They literally used kids to kill them, so they were very distrustful of people.
Absolutely, and that comes to, that I see that in my interactions with them. I see that particularly within their family interactions. A lot of them end up getting divorced because the communication, they don't have any way of communicating what they experienced to their family members. They will be, they don't have good relationships with their children. They will get divorced. It's very hard for them. So I see that, and I see the lack of trust, and that's part of it. So we find that they are.
I'm sorry, Miss Pritchett, and I'm so glad for her to do this, because I love for people who work in the field that we're discussing to join our discussion. And she says, Miss Pritchett does, that she works at the Birmingham VA. The red clinic is the resident clinic, in other words, where residents are. But the blue and gold are not. The providers have been here for a while. And there was a doctor, I think Strassner, for some time, that I think is a brilliant doctor who was at the VA. And I'm going to probably side with Ms. Pritchett. He's probably still there. But she did say, I should add that these are the primary care clinics. I can't speak to the specialty clinics.
Yeah, so some of them have been there for a long time. Some of them see turnover, and it's the frustration that I see with the clients is with the ones that have the turnover. And
Right.
So I do spend a good amount of time. So a lot of the veterans that I work with, their primary concern is mental health. So that's where my interaction is with the VA or with the VAMC, and I have found that they get very good care on that front. I just hear the complaints about the other. But I do appreciate those comments. I agree. I think that those clinics are great. And I do have friends who also are some of the psychologists in those clinics. So that's part of the reason that I know that they're so good. So I find that our veterans are, in general, very polite. They're very thoughtful in their approaches to things. Of course, they do, just like anyone, they get irritated about things. But for the most part, they're very polite. There's a lot of yes, sir, no, sir. I'll try to do the best that I can, whatever we ask them for. So we do ask them to help when there's something that we need on their cases. We trust them to help with that.
And do you think that might speak to the second gentleman, and I believe his name was Randy, who was saying that, they set up this very rigid structure and you tell you what to do and what to say and how to live. And again, this is a formative time for someone who's 18. Maybe is that something else they take into society that may even be in some weird way a barrier or a marker, you know what I mean, that identifies them as a veteran? Does that make sense?
You mean the politeness?
The politeness, correct.
Yeah, it's unusual. It definitely stands out. So we've had a lot of veterans who've worked here at our law firm, and they're so bright, but they also tend to be very formal, particularly at first. And that is something that if you don't understand where they're coming from or why, so in a southern place, like Alabama, it may not be as strange, but everyone here in the office calls me by my first name, but only the veterans call me Ms. Friedman. And I always have to tell them, you can't keep calling me Ms. Friedman. That's not going to work long term. I'll respond to it, but I really want to get to know you a little bit better than that. So I think it can be a little bit off-putting, particularly for people who are very warm. If you're working in an environment where people are very warm and talk a lot, they're outgoing, it may be seen as you being reserved or not being interested in getting to know someone as well. So I think that it can show up that way.
Yeah.
So for the most part, the veterans are respected and lauded. But as we said, Vietnam veterans are different. And I think you guys have talked about that a lot. The war was unpopular for the most part. And where you lived in the country had a lot to do with what kind of reception you got, like we said. And although the Vietnam veterans were having grenades thrown at them, that's not the story that was being told in the United States. What was being told in the United States was about how we were killing them. And so, the My Lai massacre, when the numbers vary from 300 to 500 civilians were killed, that's what people were hearing about. And then you come back to the United States and you're associated with that, whether or not you were actually involved with it, whether or not you even agreed with what you were doing while you were there. That's not the point. The point isn't, I'm in Vietnam because I agree with what the government is doing. You were just doing your service. You were trying to help your country, and you weren't in charge of making those decisions. But still, you got the brunt of the hostility when you got home.
Now, is My Lai, is that
the
famous photograph of the little girl running and crying down up the street?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So you think when you're 18, they sent you to Vietnam, you did what you could for your country, and then you come back and people aren't thankful. They just say, why'd you get involved with that? I was protesting. Why did you go? You shouldn't have been there. So you feel betrayed. You did everything that you could. You gave what you could. So a lot of our veterans, we find, are outspoken. They speak out for themselves, and I give them credit for that. Pay attention to, I did do something for this country. And they don't always want to follow authority because the authority got them into trouble before.
That's interesting to me, because you had stated, and I thought it was most interesting, that they were looking for guidance, or in a sense a mentor, I guess, and yet they disrespect and disallow authority. It seems to be like that would just be a difficult sort of dichotomy to live with.
Yeah, I think that they wanted guidance. They didn't get it. So then they thought, well, why am I trying to respect authority when it got me into trouble and no one helped me when I got back and it put me in this situation? So it's more kind of now when we see them, they're out of the service. They didn't get the guidance that they were seeking. And now they're trying to figure out what to do next. Maybe I shouldn't just do what I'm told all the time. Maybe I just need to question what I'm being told. So that's the transition that we see in them, is that they go from having, by the time I was out of college, I was questioning everything, right? But these people are coming back at 22, and that's when they're not quite at that point yet. So later on, we find that they start to question more and more what was going on around them. It kind of goes back to being reflective about the situation they had been in, and it takes them time, just like it takes anyone time to work through trauma. And so we start to see that now, that sometimes they'll question us, why are you asking me to do this? And, I tell them, sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't agree. But it's just something that I know that I'm going to come across. I know that, when they come back, sometimes we see that their first real job is the one that they have after their service, where they're trying to find their place in the world. They often feel isolated. Like I said, they don't know, besides the people that they served with, no one really understands what they went through. Even other service people who were in a different place with a different unit had different experiences. So what do you do when you come back and your closest comrades are all over the country. It's hard to come back to a family where your parents or your siblings may or may not have served, and you know that they didn't have the same experiences that you did, even if they did serve. You saw different things, had different situations that you were put in. So they have trouble with that transition. And because of that, we find that our veterans often don't volunteer information. Our Social Security clients do not always mention that they're veterans. They want to be treated the same as our other clients we see. Sometimes we will, I always ask them if they're a veteran. And sometimes they want to know why I'm asking. And the reason I'm asking is because sometimes if you're getting veterans disability benefits or something like that, or your veteran status could help us determine how we're going to approach your Social Security disability case. Sometimes the cases can be expedited if you're a veteran under certain circumstances, and so I just need that information so that I know how to move forward. But sometimes our clients are very hesitant to provide that information. Our corporate clients is interesting or different. They're not disabled. They were veterans. A lot of them use their veteran status to get preferences, business preferences, contract preferences with the government. They're proud of it, and they use that experience to their advantage. A lot of them have had long careers in the military and then retired. So they come at this with a very different mindset of their experience. Most of them would say that they had a positive experience during their military career. So just to remember, what were they enlisted? How did they end up at this point? And one thing that goes to that is, so the first man that I showed, he was drafted because he was in Vietnam. The second guy got into some legal trouble, and the judge told him that he either could go to jail or he could enlist, and it was up to him. So he felt like he was caught between a rock and a hard place, and so he chose to enlist. And I think that also goes to why he was so bitter about things. It wasn't his choice, really, to go into the service, and then he wasn't treated well when he got back, and that just made it harder for him. So one of the things that we remind people is that your observations and nonverbal cues are just as important as what comes out of the client's mouth. And of course, you guys know that, you see it all the time. But if someone's fidgeting or they can't keep eye contact, you have to decide when to ask questions, when not to ask questions, and how to build that rapport. For us in the legal industry, we want to gather outstanding documentation. That's part of what we do during our face-to-face visits. But we mainly use these, our face-to-face visits, to develop a better understanding of what the veteran has gone through and to establish that trust and rapport. So as many of you have said, it is very difficult for the veterans in general to trust outsiders. I am not a veteran, so it is difficult for them to trust me sometimes. My father, who works here, is not a veteran, and so he has the same barrier when we come to talking to our clients. But what's interesting is that my dad was, had he been drafted, he is of the Vietnam age group. I had just started, I was 2 weeks into college when 9/11 happened. So my peers were the ones who went to Afghanistan and Iraq. And so those are two of the big age groups that we see a lot of trouble with, like people who are coming back and having trouble integrating into society. So at least, although we were not veterans, we know that we don't understand that. We do understand what was going on in the world at the time and understand what reception they had when they left, and what reception they had when they came back. And we're able to connect with them on that basis.
I have a couple of comments. Ms. Dean agreed to your earlier point. My father, she says, was a pilot in the Navy serving in Vietnam. He refused to share his experience. Ironically, he had a very successful career in the Navy and as a government contractor. Ms. Bishop says there is a difference between WW2 veterans and Vietnam. Please watch facial expressions and body reactions. Great point for building trust and rapport.
So in general, we try to be respectful. Always look, your actions are going to be much more important to the veteran than your words. The way that you pay attention to them, that you don't touch them if they don't want to be touched, that you are aware of what their boundaries are. And remember when they served, because that's going to very often dictate how they're going to interact with people, what their experience has been. We always validate our clients' experience, even if we disagree with the way that they want to do things, or with something that they're saying. You don't have to agree with everything if you want to guide them in a different direction, but you have to validate that you've heard them, because they've spent plenty of time, enough time, hearing from people who disagree with them and will not validate what they saw. You can't say that didn't happen. You don't know, you weren't there. Who knows what happened? But you have to validate them if you're going to ever build trust.
Mm-hmm. Well, to Ms. Bishop's point, and you had just made the point earlier, so what are the differences between eras? The World War II vets are basically no more, as Korea is also basically no more. But there's Vietnam and Afghanistan. So do you see differences? I know there are, but what are the? I do. How do you relate to those populations?
My Vietnam veterans are very, very distrustful. They worry that I'm going to judge them based off of what they did. My Afghanistan veterans, those are the ones that I see being fawned over a lot. My Iraq veterans, thank you for your service, constant. And yes, saying thank you for your service is meaningful, but it also separates them from the people around them, because you're singling them out for something, and sometimes they don't want that. Sometimes they have been from Iraq and Afghanistan. They were welcomed home. Thank you for your service. We really appreciate the work that you did, which is different from the reception that the Vietnam veterans got. So we just try to remember that. So the Vietnam veterans may not want to, both groups of people may not want to self-identify as veterans, whether it's because the Iraq veterans just want to be, they just want to be a normal person with everyone else. Or it could be our Vietnam veterans who are worried about you judging them. So it's for different reasons, but they still may just kind of want to blend in and not have any attention called to them. But so when I say remember the era, remember that from my experience, people who were in Vietnam have a much more difficult time telling me that they served than the people who have served more recently. So I listen for the cues about the various things. Some things are going to be harder for them to talk about, some things are going to be easier. And I try to provide as much information as possible. Even when we can't help someone who calls, we try to point them in the right direction, because that's the least that I can do is tell them, what you've been told so far is not correct, or it is correct, or this is what we think might be the next step for you. And we let them take the lead as to when in the conversation they're ready to talk about various things.
And it's true that you do that, because you've done that for my clients. I want to point that out. I mean, you're a wealth of information and help.
there anything else that I can answer for you guys? Anything that you've noticed with your veterans? I know a lot of you have shared, and I appreciate that. Is there anything else that's lingering that you wanted to ask about or tell us?
I'm just fascinated, by many things. One, the difference which makes perfect sense in the different eras. And then the other thing that strikes me too, and it's a question I have, is there any difference between, in terms of the experience returning, between those who enlisted versus those who were drafted, like in Randy's case, really essentially against his will? And then if you think about Vietnam, I mean, so many of the people that had the ability to dodge the draft or protest were white elites. So if you look at the disenfranchised whites and the disenfranchised blacks and the poor, they always go to war. And so is there a difference in that experience?
I'm sorry, in the returning home experience for them?
Right, and the returning home experience, from whether one was enlisted and was willing, and versus those that really had no choice.
Yeah, I think that there is. I think that the people who were drafted, if something went wrong, then they're particularly disgruntled about it, which makes sense.
Right.
If you chose to serve, and that that was very honorable, but if something went wrong, you also know that you made that choice, even if you don't think you should have been put in the situation that you were in. So I think that there are smaller differences between them. And the woman who said that she works at the VAMC, she may have more thoughts on that than I do.
Ms. Dean says, I believe the treatment of the Vietnam veterans has led to the improvement in services to newer vets. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Because just like that first veteran said, they didn't know what PTSD was. And once it got a name, that's when all the Vietnam veterans went, oh, that's what's been going on with me. I've had all these behaviors and everyone thought I was crazy, but it actually is part of a condition that now we have a name for. And it gave them, gave everyone a framework within which to understand what this type of trauma does to you. And then they could see it as the newer veterans are coming back. So they could handle it from the beginning.
Right, that's so important. Miss Bishop, this is nice, Miss Friedman. Miss Bishop says, you are a blessing, affirmation, and validation. And thank you for serving others. And I would agree. And like I said, I know for a fact you've helped some of my clients, and who, just as you said, just to let them know, unfortunately, in their case, you really don't have a case. But it's like having a diagnosis. Yeah, having a diagnosis. Yeah. And like you said, and I love this about what I do, is you can't help everyone. But if you can just give them a number, right? The next person to call, who may then give them another number. But because I've been in that situation, and I'm sure many of us, others have, when you're in crisis, and particularly in a health crisis, and it's child, in my case, you'll do anything. I mean, you'll call anyone. And so many people say, I'm so sorry, I can't help but call this person. And you know what? For me, that was as much a blessing as if they had given me all the answers in an hour, hour and a half. They're saying, hey, I can't help you, but here's someone who can. That means so much. And I'm sure that's probably maybe what your point is today, is that if we encounter veterans in clinics and settings, to look for these cues and to be that person that says, hey, how can I help you transition? What's going on?
Right, and it may not be direct provision of services. It like you said, it can be a phone number, or sometimes it's just hearing them out. I mean, like I have people who call and they want help with something, and I tell them, unfortunately, you don't have a case. I'm not going to give you someone else's number because really there isn't anywhere to go with this. But the fact that I listened to them and explained to them why they are at this point, why there isn't anything else to do, and I've validated what has happened in their lives, they'll cry and thank me just for listening for 5 or 10 minutes, even though I'm not giving them the answer they want to hear.
You are a blessing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ms. White says big difference in WW1, WW2, and Korean War. The country was behind the military and saw the need for the war. Vietnam War was a political war, and the country was not behind the military. Vietnam veterans were not supported when they came home. They knew the country was not behind and supportive of this war. The wars were fought differently. Vietnam vets were not supported. I would agree. And it's interesting to me that the first vet pointed out that really life was a little easier in transition in the South than in the East Coast or either coast, I should say.
Right.
I'm so fascinated about Afghanistan because that's my generation. I was just graduated college in 80, what was that, 90 or 91? And the war started and I was concerned, quite frankly, about being drafted, and then it was over. I mean, that quickly.
Right. Yeah.
And to say that that's not a political, I mean, if Vietnam was the political war, that certainly was. Right,
but the reception was different for the people who came back.
Yeah, and it changed, that, and then that, in 9/11, I think changed the perception of not only veterans and service people, but police and fire and EMT and other, support people who really do spend their life serving others. And yet for so many, really, I guess since Vietnam had really been, like they said, judged and looked down upon. And so it was sort of a resurgence then of pride and service, I think, with those wars, which I'm sure made it a little more palatable to them to come home. Well, it's the end of the hour, and I'll give out one more time. I'm putting into the chat room, and thank you all for a great discussion, and thank you, Ms. Friedman, for bringing it up. Our evaluation link one more time is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/all uppercase letters QRR5 Q3X, and the password I'm typing in, hopefully I spell it right, to the veterans with a capital V, veterans plural is the password. Veterans is the password today. Ms. Friedman, do you have anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, thank you for having me, and I really appreciated the discussion. I really always enjoy hearing about particularly family members and their experiences with their fathers or their husbands who've come back from service and navigating the ups and downs of that. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. It was delightful again. I'm so appreciative to you for sharing your knowledge with our audience and with me, and look forward, I hope, to encouraging you to join us again with other great topics. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Some of you may be off on Monday. It's June 19th, Juneteenth celebration. This has been happening for 157 years in America. And so many of you may take off, and rightly so. But if you're around and you want to join us, we're doing a Dr. Jason Newell from the University of Montevallo staff, teaching staff, is providing a self-help, self-care seminar for those of us or you working in mental health. So join us then. Thank you again, Ms. Friedman, for everything. I hope everyone has a great weekend. If you're off Monday, have a great day.